Just formally welcome everybody today. So thank you very much for coming along to this. I think this is the 6th or 7th, I think, Futures of Design Education. And we're delighted today to have Ricardo Sosa with us. Just before I introduce Ricardo, I just wanted to say the next session will be on the 21st of May. And I'm hoping that Christiane Margarita Herr, I think she's at Hong Kong Polytechnic, she's going to be talking about learning across cultural and transdisciplinary boundaries. I'm not entirely sure what that's going to involve yet. They're still having a think about the discussion, but it should be an interesting one. So if you could pencil that one into your diaries, that's also going to be at 10 o'clock British summertime. So that's 9 o'clock GMT. I'll post the details. In fact, I think I do actually have the link somewhere. My apologies. Sorry, I'm trying to do too many things at the same time. My deepest apologies. And I'll post the details into the chat window in just a second. So, yeah, 21st of May, and it'd be good to see as many of you there as possible. But anyway, today, we have Ricardo Sosa today. I'm delighted about this because if anybody's heard Ricardo talk, you know that this is someone who knows what they're kind of talking about, but is also saying some really interesting and slightly provocative things. And that kind of thing appeals to me, personally speaking. I won't give you the sort of background to Ricardo because it would take too long. Ricardo's been in a few different places and spaces. I'll let you introduce yourself on that, Ricardo, and I'll maybe just hand over to you to introduce the presentation and the discussion, and let's go for it. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Yes, that's perfect. Thank you, Derek. Thank you so much. So I'm gonna share my screen. I just have a few slides, and then I have a kind of like a more interactive, hands-on activity that I would like to suggest that we try. So who am I? I'm Ricardo Sosa. I've been around for a while. I did my PhD about 16 years ago, finished my PhD in Australia and at the University of Sydney. I've been in back in Mexico and then in Singapore and here in New Zealand now. So I'm coming to you from Auckland in New Zealand. And yeah, no, I just want to acknowledge everyone that is here. Thank you. And especially Derek, thank you for organizing these sessions. They've been very, very valuable, I think. Even just from an emotional point of view, to be connected to people around the world that are interested and dealing with challenges that we've all been dealing with in terms of rethinking this education now with the new in the new conditions that we have. So I wanted to, so we had some ideas with Derek, and I wanted to kind of like maybe take the discussion a little bit in a different direction, but hopefully we come back to the core ideas of this group in terms of the future of design education. But that detour takes us a little bit outside of design, and I think in a useful way. So this the theme for today, or the orientation for today, comes from the last 12 years. I've been lucky enough to be teaching design outside of design, mainly in engineering and business schools. And in terms of business particularly, I studied about 12 years ago with my first design teaching experience in graduate programs of business, so MBAs and other kind of like graduate programs, marketing, management. And I have to say, I know this is being recorded, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but the way I started doing this 12 years ago was very, very different to what I'm doing now. And I think, obviously, at the time, I thought, well, I'm being asked to teach design to business people, so I'm going to teach design to business people. And I think what I've realized in the last 12 years is that that's maybe not a very good idea. More specifically, in the last 8, I've been with this program at a university in Singapore called NTU, Nanyang Technological University. It has a very good business school. They have an MBA and EMBA and a master's in marketing. And this is where I've been teaching design to people with considerably, a considerable experience as managers. So people with 10, 15 years in industry. These are people they tend to be from across Asia, from India to Korea and everything in between. But we've also had students from Russia and UK, Ecuador, and the United States. So very international cohort, very experienced managers. And it's mainly through teaching in this setting and learning from them that I've been dealing with these questions that I want to share with you today. So these are the questions. What are the design sensibilities, the skills, the dispositions, and so what do they look like? How might they be developed, and what benefit might they bring to designers and non-designers? So just to give you a bit of context, Singapore has been thinking and acting on design for a number of years now. I have to say I lived in the 1990s in Singapore, and as a young designer, I did not see any design going on at that time in Singapore. This was 1998 and 99. But a few years after that, they really got into it and they started developing design strategies, and they have now the Singapore Design Council. And the latest version is this document, Design 2025. The link is there. And I find, so they have 5 strategic thrusts, and I think 4 of them are really interesting. The first 4 are really interesting. And the one I want to talk about, or maybe use as a center for the discussion today, is the first one, to infuse design into the national skill set. That's how they put it. And I think the document is worth checking. But out of this, particularly they developed these 4 profiles of professionals. And the 3, the 2 on the left and the 1 on the bottom right, they are kind of like typical of design. So design specialists, people who are educated and trained in design. Then they identify design integrators, so designers who have skills that go beyond the technical design domains. And then designpreneurs, so entrepreneurs in design. But the 4th one, or the one that I'm highlighting here that I think is very interesting, is what they call design multipliers. And these are advocates of design who are a specialist in a non-design domain, so specialists in other areas, but they can apply design in their domain of work. And this is a good reflection of how I've seen my experience teaching design in businesses. It's a 40-hour module, but it's rather naive, I think, to pretend to teach design in 40 hours to anyone. And it's also not very useful because they come from different backgrounds. And why would you want to make them all uniform in terms of their design abilities? I think that would be a disservice. So instead, and this is a more challenging proposition, I feel, is how do we abstract, or how do we think of what is core in design, ways of thinking and ways of working and ways of seeing the world, and how do we bring them to other areas, and then how do we learn from them, adopting these sensibilities and these ways of thinking. So just as a way of clarifying, I'm not talking about design thinking. I'm not talking about reducing design to some caricature and then pretending to train people in design through these kind of like recipes or formulas. So I stay with the aim, that, as they put it, to apply design in their domain of work, but not, as I said, not doing design as we know it, but abstracting the principles or the sensibilities, I call them here, that designers develop in their education. And obviously this is in a condensed way, But how do we share that with them? And this is, I think, very important to highlight, without us knowing how they are going to apply it, because we are not experts in their fields. And this is a very healthy, I feel, mutual space of not knowing. So that's where the best learning happens, I believe, when both sides involved don't know where this is going to take them. And so for me, what I've been doing, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, is identifying this opportunity to build on what I think as design educators we've learned while teaching design to designers, to think and talk about how we may teach aspects of design to non-designers. And so these are the questions. What are the design sensibilities that can be infused? This is how they put it in the document. The next generation workforce infused with design sensibilities. What are these design sensibilities? And then I guess the other question would be, obviously, how do we infuse them at all levels of education, from preschool to professional development or to PhD, like to all the areas. So some of the things that I'm talking about are things like framing, abductive logic, iteration, materiality, idea evaluation, effectuation, analogical reasoning, co-creation, creative collaboration. Things that I have a feeling that we don't teach explicitly in design. That's my experience. I think we rely on these sensibilities and these skills and dispositions to happen as the result of how we teach design, especially studio or project-based. And I think they get it. Design students get it after 2, 3, 4 years of doing projects or studio. They get it. But I guess what I'm noticing here is that we can somehow condense or extract the core ideas and then see how we teach them. So we mostly teach tacitly or experientially in design these things. And how can we translate them or transfer them into other domains and professions? So just to close this short presentation, I have some concrete examples from the students in Singapore, where I've taught this. And just to give you a bit of context, so it's 40 hours, it's block teaching. So we are together for 5 days, 8 hours a day. And we cover a lot of ground. We invite guest speakers from the different design industries, companies. And then their whole assessment for the module is to go away for a month after the course finishes, to go away for a month and to apply in their daily professional life the principles, and to write a report and share the report with us after a month. They do this individually. After 3 weeks, they submit the report individually. And then the 4th week, they share the reports between each other. And then they have a percentage of the assessment is a team report or an aggregate report, where they give feedback to each other and they comment on the work of each other and the commonalities. But just to stress, we have some people, employed as data scientists in banks, and then we have marketing people, and then we have engineers. We have people from all sorts of areas. So that's really interesting. And I want to share with you, I have 4 examples, 2 individual and 2 group reports. And I can't give a lot of detail because there might be some sensitive data here, sensitive information. But basically, this one that we are seeing here is someone who is in charge of recruitment in a big company. And they identified, for the final report, they identified turnover as a big problem. And so they applied wicked problem framing to their practice of hiring in Thailand. And they sat with their teams several times, several sessions, to try and turn from a tame question into wicked questions. So they use things like obviously wicked problems, but they also we use techniques for asking questions and identifying stakeholders. And in the end, what this causes after a few sessions is for them to realize that maybe the fundamental premises of recruitment were actually quite flawed. And that's why the system wasn't working very well for them. This is another one. This is the data scientist from a big company in Singapore, and they are dealing with the bank. And again, I cannot give a lot of detail, but they basically, if you see here, I'm reading from the report. Creativity is not my cup of tea. I am not creative. This is what I thought before I went for the course. For me, a creative person. And then they come to the realization that they can be creative as data scientists. They never saw themselves as creative. And then they say, down here, they say, when we were asked by Professor Ricardo to apply some creativity and design in our professional life, I was totally at a loss, not understanding how I would do that. My job scope of data mining includes blah, 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 but not really being creative. But then they had a breakthrough. I cannot give a lot of details, but they found ways that they could use the data in new ways for new purposes to extend and improve the services they provide to their clients. And this is by them realizing they can be creative and they can lead creative teams as well. So it's beautiful to see how they discover the creativity in themselves after maybe 30 or 40 years of not feeling it. But they also equally impressive is when they tell us in the reports that they identify the creativity of their teams. So they identify the creativity of other people in doing that. And these are a couple from groups. These three, this is after they shared what they did. Luke Shepard in the middle. He was between jobs at the time, but he worked with someone else to redefine meetings. So that was their brief. The brief that they worked on was to redesign meetings at that company or at that team in the company. And they come up with ideation sessions and they worked with some experience prototyping ideas to change how they saw meetings and how they practiced that. And here, three more. We do get some rather kind of like simple ideas that people have. Some people choose to apply this more to their personal life, not so much their professional life. So we had an Ecuadorian student who was, again, full-time doing his master's, so he didn't have a job at the time. And what he did for the project is for 1 month, he translated the whole course to his 4 and 7 year olds. So with activities appropriate for that age group, those age groups, he basically took the main ideas from the course and he designed activities for them to share the content of the course with them. But yeah, we see several instances of people realizing that maybe the KPIs they are working on are not helpful. So when it comes the time of the year to define KPIs with line managers and so on, they can do something different. And identifying maybe separating symptoms from causes in problems. So things that you would do in design very naturally because of experience and practical experience and engaging with this. It's not that we sit down to study how to reframe a problem, but we do it through practice and it becomes natural. And I think in this case, we see glimpses of that transferability of these skills. Obviously, I'm talking about a short course, 40 hours, but it's interesting. We've had people come back to us a couple of years after they graduate from the program and sharing with us stories of how some of the concepts from this particular module were life-changing for them in terms of how they applied some of these ideas in terms of how they relate to their families, to their relatives, we've had really heartwarming stories. We had a Japanese student who, as a result of the course, he included in his report that for the first time he grabbed the phone and called his father to tell him that he loves him. And that's something that really, I think it's transformative in the way that we see this. And as I said, I think as designers, it's not only to give, but I think we can also take back when we see how they apply things. And we can then ask ourselves, how may such design sensibilities be better taught in design education? I think we go with a lot of inertias in design, teaching the way we were taught, or teaching the ways that are normal, standard, and that we know they work somehow. We don't know exactly how or why. But I think that what this gives us is the opportunity to have a perspective of how other fields, other people value and they apply these ideas, and then how we can learn from that and bring that back to the design classroom to do things differently or better. So that's the presentation. And then what I thought we could do is we could open the discussion, and we could have this Miro board there as well. Because sometimes the turn taking is really interesting and really good to have the discussion, but I feel that sometimes the ideas don't flow as they could. So if people want to join the Miro, I can stop sharing the screen now, or I don't know. I see people joining, that's great. And so basically 3 areas. So in the middle, what are the design sensibilities? I just added the ones I've experienced there, but by all means, feel free to take a Post-it note and just write maybe one idea per Post-it note. You can duplicate, move the Post-it notes, do whatever you want with them. And then on the left-hand side would be, how do you teach them in design now? And then on the right-hand side, the yellow area would be, how would you teach them? And you can choose if you're talking about kindergarten or executive education or PhD or any other context that you want to play with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. That was a really interesting presentation. I've posted a link to the Miro board in the text chat for anybody who wants to jump in there. And as we maybe go through a bit of discussion, please feel free to keep adding to it. Personally, I find Miro quite useful, almost as like a scribble tool as you're talking about something, and you can add ideas as you go. So please feel free to keep adding to that. Yeah, I mean, I've got loads of questions from that presentation, Ricardo. It's really, really interesting work. And I think it's probably reflective of I think there's quite a few people sensing that general shift, not just in design education, but maybe in those other spaces, recognizing that we need to go way beyond just this superficial and skills-based type stuff and really start to get to the bottom of what are the actual underlying values that are imparted or encouraged, developed in a design education. Yeah, so I'm not going to ask any questions myself yet. I'm going to open it out to anybody else who wanted to pose any thoughts or particularly any questions, particularly on the presentation just now. Or Ricardo, did you want a sort of a short period to maybe have a play with the Miro board first?
Oh, I'm open to. I see some people already using the Miro board. Yeah.
Too interesting. So, Naz, do you want to?
Oh yes. Hello, Ricardo. How are you?
Hi, Naz. Good.
Nice
Good to see you.
Yeah, very nice to see you too. Thank you very much for this. One thing I wanted to ask you: how do you think these people from other work domains see you as the designer?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Oh gosh, it is a great question. I stress a lot in the course. I talk a lot about identity in the course. We talk in the group, and it's a topic that is very central in this type of courses because people have these stereotypes and these cliches that if you're a designer, you should dress in some way, you should behave in some way. And if you're not a designer, then you should not dress in such way, or so we go through that, and I stress as much as I can the importance of diversity, and I think, I don't know that I'm answering your question, but, or maybe I didn't understand the question fully, but I'm very glad when I see students saying, I don't have to look certain way, or I don't have to be certain way. That is the stereotype. And this comes up because, remember, this is a course in Asia. We talk a lot about culture. We talk a lot about the Western idea of design and the Western idea of creativity, and how reductive it is, and how it leaves out a lot of the other cultures. And yeah, but Naz, would you like to
yes, well,
expand?
thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes, well, I was wondering about the way you convey identity, maybe, but also how they see your expertise, your domain of work. One example I would like to give is when we collaborate, let's say, with engineers, they have a different perspective of, designers. Everyone's familiar with that perspective, I'm sure. Marketing people from business, they have an entirely different perspective of who we are, how we can contribute, and it's very different to what engineers have. There's no intersection in between the way they see. But the thing is, after some time, we notice that they push us aside because they think we have, delivered some information that now they can make use of, and no need to collaborate anymore because they know they don't have to ask for opinions. They don't have to work together anymore because they know how to do things. They've been taught, and what they're doing is now design. So
this is, yeah. No, I think Naz, you get to the core idea that I was trying to convey before. This is the risk, and I admit 12 years ago I was in that camp. This is the risk of giving the message, giving the idea that we are teaching them to design. And I think that's the risk. These days, no. These days, I can share several anecdotes and ways. I've had teams of engineers and business people coming back to me after the course and telling me, I thought the designer in the team was going to be the one in charge of having the ideas. Now I realize that person is actually it's very critical in the team, because that person helps us bring the creativity of everyone else in the team. But by all means, I think my biggest learning in the last 12 years has been that courses like this, it's ridiculous to pretend that we're teaching them to design. We are not. And that's the risk. I think design thinking creates that illusion, and they call them design thinkers now. And they, yeah, exactly. They say, why do we need these artists now? We can do it ourselves. And no, I think from our experience, the way we teach it, and I'm very humbled. I'm very happy. Last year, 2019. So this is a core module of the Masters of Marketing. Obviously, they have proper marketing courses as part of their masters, but they granted me the Teacher of the Year award, this cohort of students. And I think it comes from that realization that no, they are not designers in 40 hours, but they are able to speak the language with designers. They are able to sit at the table with designers and design the brief together in the case of marketing. Whereas before they saw themselves as the holders of the brief and passing it to designers. Now they realize that for a brief to work, it has to be defined between different areas, including users and clients and a whole range of stakeholders. So no, I'm happy that in most cases, what I see is not that attitude. I've seen it before, but I think we need to be careful. And I completely understand why some designers are very reluctant to teach in business or in engineering, because they've had that experience that you described.
Thank you for this. I'm going off to the mirror board.
Yes.
Yeah,
Lots of ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, feel free. Does anyone else have any questions for Ricardo or any observations or thoughts on the presentation so far? I know certainly one thing that's it's been of interest to me, I think, throughout my professional career. It's not about what people do, and even in some of the things that you've described, Ricardo, a lot of it did seem to be either very methods or tools focused, that we're still looking at, if you like, the superficial behaviour. And to me, the word sensibilities was an important one. We've started to use the word capacities at the OU and a few other words like attitudes. And they're kind of almost pseudo-cognitive processes. It's getting to that next level of, so you've got the skill, the thing that's obvious, the thing that you can see when you look in the studio. But what underlies that are the mind states that we bring to that practice. And that sometimes is actually far more important. And I suspect, but I've got no proof whatsoever, Ricardo, because this is the difficult thing, as Lawson says, you can't see what's going on in here. I suspect it's almost that permission slip that you're giving your students in some ways, because that phrase life-changing, I've heard that a lot for our course as well, simply because all we're doing is, in some ways, allowing the students to see for themselves that it is okay to think that way. It is okay to draw rather than do a bullet point list. It is okay to do all of these kind of different things. And when that realization takes hold, you see a dramatic transformation in an individual. And it seems to me that there's a part of it that's describing that, Ricardo. I wonder if you either thought about that or whether you maybe given some thought to what are those things, what are those maybe more underlying, I don't know, cognitive states, mind states, I don't know.
Yes, yes, no, I agree. And they are even affective states and cultural, gender. I have thought about a lot about this because I've seen it in the students, and I've seen their apprehension, and they really want to grab a tool or a technique. Especially, I think, business students, they are very much used to just give me the tool, give me the technique. I need to put it in practice. I need to use it. And there is a fixation, and it's almost like a security blanket. And I think that's why design thinking is so successful, because it gives them that certainty and that that map that they can then follow. And it just really plays to their strengths and weaknesses and their fears and their excitement. So it's quite a job that we need to do to get away from that. And it's not something that I do straight. Like, I don't start by telling them don't use tools and don't use techniques, because that would just close that communication. So I give them, you're right, I give them, and by the way, so I started teaching 8 years ago. The first 4 years, every year I would do like a marginal improvement on the previous year. So every year I would kind of like, I need to change this, I need to adapt this activity didn't work, this one worked really well. I would do things like blindfold activities, go out to the real world, out the classroom. We would comment on the type of classrooms that business schools have and the type of pedagogies and the relationship. So it's a bit meta. But after 4 years, the 5th year that I taught it, I thought, no, this is getting as good as it's going to be. I need to ditch everything. And I just took everything I had done for 4 years and I just put it down the rubbish bin. And I started for the 5th year, I started with a blank canvas. And that to me was a huge realization, because then I could identify, okay, why have they been doing this? Okay, because they need that security, that rope to grab, because the turbulence, the water is too turbulent. So they need something to hold. So I would give them some of this. They love some techniques and some tools. They just love them. And that's fine, because as we do that, we talk about the importance of how you feel and what you talked about, the dispositions, how you see the world differently. And many of them, not all, many of them come around, and they understand that they can almost use any technique and any method. They can use, they can open any kind of like book on design methods or creativity methods, and they can pretty much use any of them, knowing that they might work, they might not work. Sometimes they don't work, sometimes they do. Also knowing that reflecting on the process is really important. So instead of, let's say, the 6-hat technique is one that is, wow, it's just, I don't know, there is something about it. I don't know if it's an Asian thing or just a human thing or a business thing, but this crowd loves 6-hat technique. And it's fine. They do it. We put it in practice in a short activity. But then I invite them to change the number of hats and the color of hats and the meaning of the hats. And then they realize that it wasn't about the 6 hats and the yellow and the white and the black, but it's the structure that it allows the team, the group, to change behavior and to self-reinforce certain types of ideas or certain types of behaviors in a timed manner. And then they understand, we can do 3 hats and one of them can be purple, and that's going to be this thing that is typical in Indonesia or in Malaysia, and it's going to mean this. In the last iteration, the one I ran a couple of weeks ago, one team created, I thought this was hilarious, to be honest. They created, so they've known each other for a while, this group. So they gave the hats the names of their teammates. And so the hat was, everyone in the team had to behave like that person for 10 minutes when they were creating ideas. And I thought this was great. Like I asked them, is that okay? Like, are you fine with people, like labeling the hat after you? And people said, yeah, no, that's fine. It's in good spirit. So they got the idea that it's not just using a sequence, but it's coming up with your own tools.
So and I wonder whether there's something deeper in this as well, Ricardo. So there's 2 really important, almost like learning patterns that you've just described there that are probably applied implicitly in the studio, as you talked about before, and would never be questioned. One is the use of the tool, but then also the exposure of the reflection on that tool, the exposure, the explicit exposure, not just the Shone's reflection and action. You go away and think about it yourself. I better not say that. But actually making it explicit, making it articulate, and not necessarily in a provocative way, but allowing that to emerge, I'm guessing, as you go through it. And the second one is actually working with the tool to adapt it slightly. I mean, these are really, really simple learning moves that seem to have a disproportionately deeper and potentially positive effect, if you see what I mean. And again, it always strikes me as so amazing that the simplest tools that we use in teaching settings are the most effective and the ones that people own, really genuinely own and turn into transformation. So, yeah, thank you. Good to borrow. Cool.
To make things really interesting, a couple of years I've had designers in the group, and that has been really interesting. We've had people from a couple of and these are graphic and product designers from big corporations in Southeast Asia, designers of electronics and appliances, big brands. And they take this course because they are becoming leaders in their field. So they take a master's in an MBA or a master's in marketing and so on. And the first time this happened to me, because we go around, we introduce ourselves. And the first time someone said, I'm a designer, I thought, oh my God, this is going to be a disaster. Like, what can I teach them? I was not prepared. I was thinking of a team, of a group of business people. But no, to my surprise, the designer was able to change some of their thinking around design. Part of that was because of what I had prepared, but part of it was just from seeing what other people were able to do that had zero training in design. And just to give you a concrete example, at that time we had a sketching activity, just very simple sketching activity to communicate the idea of visual thinking and and thinking with images, and like kind of like pre-linguistic thinking and learning. And at some point so we have 2 cycles of sketching. So after about 40 minutes of creative exercises sketching, I would ask them, okay, so now take all your drawings, put them to the side. You can throw them out. It's not something you are going to put on your fridge with a magnet. It's just a tool for thinking. So get rid of them. And now let's draw a happy cube. But you cannot use smiley faces, or you cannot use like simple decorations. But just draw the shape of the cube without adding little hands or faces or anything. Just the shape of the cube, but make it look happy. And we do this a few times with different adjectives and different feelings. And then we show, like we just raise the sheet of paper, show it to everyone else. And a few times the designers would say, wow, that what that person drew is mind-blowing. It's better than the average that you would see in a design course. Yeah.
No, no, honestly, that doesn't surprise me. It genuinely doesn't, because where the divergent thinking might come from, or where the alternative ideas come from, we get very myopic, I think, as designers. Some of our hardest students to teach at the OU in the UK, again, we're a general design discipline, if you like, are actually existing designers, existing design students, for exactly that same reason, Ricardo. I like that activity though, design a happy cube. I'm gonna have a go at that one later. Does anyone else have any questions or any observations? There must be somebody else who wants to talk about something. No? Okay, I'm going to maybe join it to a Futures meetup that we had a couple of sessions ago. Well, it was actually Liv, who's with us today, Liv and Ingvild, who were talking about early years education. Now, I know, Ricardo, that you probably haven't explored maybe the boundaries of where this education might take place, but I wonder, is there any point in speculating about that? Do you see anything, I suppose, in the relation between what you're doing to other spaces of education, if that makes sense? We've talked about it a bit in a disciplinary sense, coming from business to design or whatever it might be. But the other thing that struck me about what we do, which is kind of similar, but maybe not as subtle and as advanced as what you do, one of the things that struck me in one of my first tutorials was the epiphany that all of these people, all I was doing was quite literally, as I said before, giving them a permission slip. And it was actually quite sad to see that I had to give them permission, that it's okay to use, a book that doesn't have lines in it, or it's okay to draw, it's okay to think, it's okay to say things in these particular ways. So I wonder if there's any speculation about the age at which, or maybe the general human stage at which this type of development might take place or should take place. I don't know. Maybe that's beyond what you're thinking about just now, Ricardo. I don't know.
It is, but we do some other work on computational thinking with secondary schools. So I think I'm going to stay with that question and come back to you in the future. Yes.
Definitely. So that's a good one. Yeah, definitely. Okay. Anyone else have any other questions? Britta,
yes.
go for it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think all of us that are parents, obviously I can only speak for the UK perspective, but I can see that in my daughter, that the school almost beats it out of them, to have any critical mind. So I think the literature is there anyway. Like Ken Robinson, what he advocated for that for years, for it to be starting at such a young age, to allow children to have this voice. But we don't teach that, do we? Because it's not convenient. We have to, they have to be taught to behave. And so it's difficult then if you've got these adults that all your life you've been conditioned that that's the right way to be. I think there's very few of, I say us, that rebel You know, it's not the norm, is it, to think outside of the box? I think you said yourself, Derek, you know, that you know, even people that you're teaching, you know, you sort of conform to things, even in design, don't you? I would love to see this type of thing in school, you know, primary schools.
Watch this space. We're thinking about it. Yeah. One of the things we don't have much time to affect, you know, the global climate crisis. One of the things we can affect is the way that we actually do think, the way that we actually do negotiate, I suppose, with ourselves. But yeah, that's another story.
Yeah, I mean, I feel sad because I think the point, you know, my daughter's 11 now, but I think the time has been missed now with her. She was so environmentally driven, particularly when we lived in Indonesia, where you see, you're there experiencing flooding and things. And now, you know, she's tween and she's not interested in those things. But I think, you know, younger children are, you know, they were very active. So yeah, it would be fantastic for design to work with primary schools.
Well, certainly in creativity research, there is a well-known bifurcation that happens when you get to about sort of 11, 12 years old, usually. Again, this is predominantly in Western studies. So again, it's difficult to separate the cultural from the physiological, if you like, but there is a massive swing from, you know, creative genius and divergent thinking. It basically flips, such that there's only about 10% of kids that come out of that phase in their life. And that can be a huge problem. Liv, do you want to jump in on that? I could see you jumping in on that. I'll come to you in a second.
Just a very short one. But I was thinking of this. I think the whole thing is kind of political in a way, because I don't know if this is the case in the UK, but this PISA reports that comes every 3 years. Singapore is the best, together with Finland, almost every year, and they measures upon reading, natural science, and mathematics. And in Norway, this report is very, very important for how they are planning for the upcoming years of how to guide school development. So I think in a way it's political, in a way that critical thinking is there, but it's critical thinking connected to mathematics, natural science, but not linked to practical skills, drawing, making. So I think some of the problems that many of us have when we come to collaboration on university level is that we don't have the same basic education where practical skills also connected to critical thinking, design thinking is as a base, as in the same way as we have reading, writing, and arithmetic and natural science as a common base. So it needs to start earlier to get some benefit. When you, Ricardo, very nice, explains how you work with engineers, collaboration with designers. So I think it is something ahead, and it needs to start earlier. So just a comment. Very nice presentation, however. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a huge and very significant clue in the fact, Ricardo, that you seem to recognise very quick and early successes in students, that they're able to see these things very readily and quickly for themselves, which suggests very strongly that there is something latent in human ability, and that if it is redirected, or if it's shown in a particular way, or if it's brought out in a particular way, it is there, it's waiting to happen. Now, at the risk of being controversial, I'm not going to suggest it's a universal, but certainly it's definitely something that's there from childhood through into adulthood for most of the students that we seem to be talking about. So that's a big clue that, as you say, Liv, it is political, that in some sense we are suppressing that in some way and saying it's not okay to do this, we prefer these behaviours. And that's Ken Robinson's argument as well, Britta. Absolutely, word for word almost. But I wonder, touching on the more controversial side of it, Ricardo, do you have any sense or idea of whether or not, I'm not going to say universal in the sense of, a platonic universal, but whether these are just very human things, attitudes, dispositions, or whatever they might be, or are they really genuinely learned, or is it some kind of blend between the two, or is that again too speculative and way beyond what you?
No, I think it's a great question. We do reflect in those courses when we talk about Asia, we talk about, and I quote Wozniak, Steve Wozniak from Apple, because he's been brought to both India and Singapore, paid probably a lot of money to give these interviews and presentations. And in both countries, he's been quite controversial by saying that Apple would have never appear in India or in Singapore because these are not countries that are conducive of creativity. And we talk about these things. We talk about Japan and Japanese culture and hierarchies and tradition, and yet having innovation. So I think, I don't know, but my current thinking, Derek, is that the universal itch to change things is there. I think that's quite universal. People being dissatisfied with what is there. Listening to Liv and you now, I'm thinking that yes, I hadn't realized before how the big percentage of what we do in these courses is to fight the fear or the fears that these people bring to the course because of, and they share with us some things that their own parents told them when they were growing up, teachers told them when they were growing up. And these are adults, 30, 40, 50-year-olds that are very, very afraid. And a lot of what we do is to take care of that and tell them that it's okay, that's something that they can deal with in their own ways. But I think in terms of universality, I would say there is probably this dual mechanism of things that most people react to, but then the way they do it is shaped by their culture and by their life experience. And this is where it's very dangerous to teach creativity and design. So here is the way I articulate it is, you want to teach creativity in a business school, bring a creative person because they will teach creativity to a business school, in a business school. I think that's already a flawed way of thinking, because you are brought as a creative expert or the design expert. You're going to fall into that place of, pay attention. I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna tell you how to be creative. I'm gonna tell you how to design because I have 20 years experience or whatever. So I think, if anything, what I've gone through in the last 12 years has been a process of recognizing my own limitations, my own very personal cultural perspective of creativity and design, and then opening myself and becoming vulnerable in front of them and telling them, look, this is how I did it, and these are all the biases that I bring. But you don't have to do it this way because you're unique, you're different, we're very different. And what I ask you is to find out the ways that you are unique and that you can do this your own. So religion, family relationships, life experience, all of that is different. You know how to do that. And that goes even down to the more prosaic things like, you're an expert in these tools, in R or in this programming language or in that recruitment process, like different things that people do. And I have zero idea how you do it. So how am I going to tell you how to be creative doing that? That's something that you have to figure out by yourselves. But I can just show you how different people do it but not because it's going to be a model for you to follow at all. Yeah.
No, I mean that sounds like a lovely intersection between the kind of, if you like, the localized and the universal. Ricardo, that's a nicely subtle understanding of that intersection as well. Sorry, Naz, I completely bypassed the question that you had.
Oh, no problem at all. No problem at all. I mean, the discussions have gone in a totally different direction. And
I'm so sorry.
No problem. No problem.
Do you want to ask?
Well, okay. No, I was just in your presentation, Ricardo, you mentioned the formulation of those wicked questions. I find it very significant, considering different disciplines have their own different formulations of questions. So how is it possible to make this transformation from structured questions that, for example, engineers have very rigidly set, and asking them to shift their perspective, widen their maybe points of view, and transform them into wicked questions? You have some methods probably. You ask them to ask questions of why, what, who. That was in your slide.
Yeah. To ask questions that are open-ended and questions that breed other questions and questions that create interest. We do, and obviously this is very hard, right? Because it's 8 hours, 5 days in a row. We don't have any time in between. So pedagogically, it's quite difficult. It has been quite challenging. It's exhausting to be teaching 5 days, 8 hours a day, a combination of experiential. So there is the odd video that I showed them. There is the odd kind of like mini lecture. As I said, we bring design professionals from outside to share experiences. It's a 15-minute, so everything is planned in 15-minute blocks. So it's quite crazy. But somehow it works. So I think Naz, you ask very good questions, because they really make me think, what is it that out of everything that we do, what is the magic formula? And at the moment, I have to say it's a little bit of like the combination of everything that ends up working. But I think probably I need another 40 years teaching this course to be able to understand. Look. These were the 5 top things. And just for fun, I also change a lot of the activities year on year. This year, for instance, was a dual challenge. One was teaching online. That was really hard. And the other challenge was that the age group, because of the own dynamics in Singapore and the pandemic and everything else, this year we had an average age in the group about 10 years younger than we usually do. And I thought, well, that's going to be different, but oh my God, I didn't realize how different it was going to be. The difference that 10 years of the lack of 10 years of professional experience, the attitudes and the level of participation went down. There was very little pushback from them, very little. And also with the pushback comes the buy-in as well. Once we negotiate those back and forth dialogues, people offer counterexamples. Other people disagree with me or with other students. And there is a very healthy, when you work with more experienced people, there is a very healthy flow of ideas and as I said, pushbacks, and people could sometimes come back the next day and they said, I yesterday I thought you were nuts, but I actually thought about it, or I talked to my partner, or I slept on this, and today I think I say it very differently. We didn't have much of that this year because the age group was so young. And I think the schooling experience was very strong. Yes. So it's funny how you feel you have nailed it, and then one thing changes and it's like, oh my gosh, I feel like it's the first time again.
Thank you.
That's really interesting, Ricardo. I recognise precisely that. I hadn't actually put my finger on what that difference was until you just articulated it perfectly there. But our age has also shifted, and I think we're starting to realise just how much we'd relied on that experience that our older students had brought to situations. I mean, we're kind of lucky in that a lot of our older students do sometimes work with the younger students. We put them together in certain ways, and that can be quite a nice pairing sort of activity that brings students out. But I think you're absolutely right. It's almost like a very finely woven cloth. If you pull one thread away, suddenly there's a massive gap through the whole thing. These things really genuinely do interleave.
Yeah.
Cool. Wow. Right. Okay. I'm close. I'm conscious of the fact that we're at the top of the hour. So I'm going to probably end the recording just now. And just once again, Ricardo, thank you so much. It was precisely what I thought it might be, that, you know, this is a very clearly well-considered, some really well-considered thoughts and ideas. The subtlety and the maturity of those thoughts as well, I think, is actually something quite special and quite precious. I know I've learned quite a few things, so thank you very much for sharing that with us. And thank you, everybody, for your questions. I'm guessing that you can still contribute to the Miro board for a wee while afterwards. I'm going to spend some time after just now, because I think there's some really interesting questions on the outside context to the object themselves as well. Would that be okay, yep. Ricardo?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Please.
So
thank you so much. Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Nas. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.